Hey, welcome to another Bible study walkthrough where you're going to learn how to read and study the Bible. We're in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 5. And if you've been following along with us, we noted in the last episode, which I want to give you some context. When you read the Bible, know the context of whatever verse you're reading. What the context is that the author is calling the original audience to not abandon the message they've heard, to not neglect a great salvation, right? Because it was attested to by God. He bore witness to it. It's a very serious deal. And then we get to verse 5, and there seems to be this brand new topic brought up that's unrelated, and yet it's not. The author's intentionally bringing up this topic. Verse 5, it says, "It was not to angels that God subjected the world to come." And we noted that when you read the Bible, notice any repeating words. Angels and the world are repeating words that we've seen already up to this point in Hebrews. We've seen the world used quite a bit, whether it's the heavens and the earth, whether it's the world like explicitly referenced, or angels. We've seen these ideas put forth several times. And so by the time we get to chapter 2, verse 5, we should have a pretty clear idea of what the author has already told us about angels and the world to come. Right? So these are not unrelated ideas. It's as if the author in Hebrews here, and sometimes in the Bible this will happen with biblical authors, they'll put certain ideas on hold to address almost a side tangent, and then they'll connect the two dots, and it'll make sense to you when they're done explaining it all. But here we have this explanation, this word "for." Because, and we explained in the last episode that the main point of chapter 2 is pay attention to what you've heard, don't abandon or don't neglect this great salvation. Because God didn't subject the future world or new creation to angels, the world of which we're speaking, of course. Actually, it has been testified somewhere, and you're going to see quotations here. When you read the Bible and you notice quotations, obviously the author or the person speaking is quoting someone, right? But in this case, what's being quoted is the Old Testament, specifically Psalm chapter 8, verse 4 through 6, right? So here, when you notice there's a reference to the Old Testament, one of the greatest tips I can give you is go to that Old Testament passage and read that in context. Understand the main point of that chapter in order to understand the main point of what's happening here, right? Because whatever the main point is in its original context, that's going to be the main point now. The main point doesn't change, but the way the authors might use that quotation or that reference might be to highlight something different. Okay, so I would recommend you guys go read Psalm chapter 8 in its entirety, and you might see a bunch of ideas that relate to what we've seen already in Hebrews 2. Okay, so he's going to quote here, "It has been testified somewhere, 'What is man that you are mindful of him?'" Now, as we approach this quotation, it's helpful for you as a Bible student to think about the idea that preceded this quotation, right? So before he jumps into an Old Testament quotation, he made a point in verse 5. God didn't subject future world to angels. God did not put angels in charge of the future new creation, right? And in whatever way he's going to use this Old Testament reference, it's going to connect to that idea, right? It's going to connect to the main point put forth in verse 5. So that this quotation, Psalm chapter 8, ends up being evidence of the main point he made in verse 5. It's going to be supplementary. So, what is man that you're mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. And we noted that the word angels, or angels in general, are referenced quite a bit up to this point, especially in chapter 1, right? You've crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. Now, I'm just going to highlight this in orange because I've already seen the word subjection used in verse 5. Now, it wasn't subjection, but subject or subjected. So I've seen that idea. It was the author saying, look, God's not going to subject new creation under the authority and dominion of angels, right? So That helps me make sense of what's happening here. When you read the Bible, do your best to take note of where certain words have been used so you can reference them. So maybe what I'll do is I'll draw a little arrow here and I'll put, verse 5 also has this word, or angels. I'll just put chapter 1 in general, right? So remember, the main point of chapter 2 so far is don't abandon this great salvation, right? Don't neglect the message that you've heard. And then we get into for or because. Let me tell you why. God didn't subject the future world to angels. Let me show you what I mean. And he's going to use the Old Testament to prove that. Now, if you go to Psalm 8, this is the psalmist David talking to God, saying, man, what is man that you're mindful of him? Now, what I've done here is I've circled, I'm going to highlight each of these instances in yellow. Anytime humanity is referenced, man, him, his, okay? When you highlight that, you're going to see, wow, this quotation has a lot to do with humanity. Not just man being the, male, but humanity, Adam. What is humanity that you're mindful of him? In other words, God, why do you care for us? Why are you mindful of us, that you care for us? The Son of Man, right? Those who descend are offspring of the woman, right? Fellow human beings. Now look at how he describes humanity. You made him for a little while lower than the angels. Okay? So, if you've been reading along with us, and if you're a good Bible student, I'm not always a good one, but I try to be, you would know that the main point of chapter 1 is that Jesus is above the angels. Okay, I'm highlighting this in blue to make a point. Chapter 1, over and over, the author's saying Jesus is higher than angels. He's better. He's above them. But now we have humanity made lower than the angels. Okay? So it's just something for me to think about. Like, I've seen this idea at play already in the first chapter. I wonder if that's going to relate to this verse here in chapter 7, or in verse 7. I wonder if the idea of Jesus being greater than angels is somehow going to be brought back into play after he quotes this, that humanity is lower than the angels. But also, notice this time. It's only for a little while. Wow. So, God made humanity for a little while. This tells me for how long. This is a duration of time. When you read the Bible, pay careful attention to any references to a duration of time or a length of time, right? That'll give you a time marker on an action or event. So humanity is made lower than the angels for a little while, right? You've crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. There's one more thing that I notice that I'm going to highlight in orange, and as a good Bible student, our job is to think, have I seen any reference to the feet? I know it's a weird question. Have I seen any reference to the feet up to this point in Hebrews? The answer is yes. Yes, I have. God actually tells the Son, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool for your feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take note of that, and I'm going to relate this to chapter 2, verse 8. So here the feet of Jesus are referenced as triumphing and conquering his enemies. In chapter 2, the feet of humanity are referenced, right? And everything is in subjection to their feet. Think about, and this is the question that we should ask, when did this happen? What does this mean? These are questions that we ask as we approach Scripture. So, instead of just going, oh yeah, he's putting everything in subjection under the feet of humanity. Well, hold on. When did God do that? What does that mean, that everything is in subjection under the feet of humanity? So, what I'm going to do is, ask those questions, think through that, meditate on previous passages, and if nothing comes to mind immediately, I'm going to read on. This is what I want to encourage you guys to do. As you ask questions and you don't have the answer immediately, keep reading, keep exploring, keep studying, keep seeking. And eventually, you're going to find clarity to the answer. But I want to mention a few things in this verse that I think it's on us to pay attention to and to highlight. Just like I highlighted in yellow any reference to humanity, what I'm going to do here is highlight, actually I'm going to use blue, okay? What I'm going to do is highlight any action on the part of God or anything God is doing here. And you go, why would I do that? Because I've read this enough to know that there's a lot of things God is doing in this passage to humanity. And I just want to take note of that because there's a list developing. Watch, what is man that you are mindful of him? God is mindful of humanity. Or the Son of Man, just another way of saying humanity. Or the Son of Man that you care for him. You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You've crowned him with glory and honor. You've put everything in subjection to his feet. Do you see what I did there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things in 2 verses. Technically 1, 2, 3. 3 verses. 5 things God does to humanity. Now, what I want to do is take note of that. I want to take note because the author has chosen this passage in Psalm 8 on purpose. And I just want to, the only reason I highlight that is because as you read the Bible, you don't just want to pay attention to repeating words. You want to pay attention to repeating ideas. And so a repeating idea in these 3 verses is God doing something. He's mindful. He cares. He made us. He crowned humanity. He put everything in subjection to the feet of humanity, right? And so we'll get to the rest of this verse in the next Bible study walkthrough. But for now, what I want you to do is think about, okay, all the main ideas or main points that have been brought out just here in chapter 2. This is what we do as Bible students. We connect main ideas that we notice. In chapter 2, all right, let's start in chapter 1. Let's go all the way back. Okay, in chapter 1, Jesus is better than angels, right? In the beginning of chapter 2, pay attention to the great salvation that you've heard and don't neglect it. That's main point number 2. Number 3, God didn't subject the future new creation to angels, right? But instead, the author of Hebrews is going to go on and talk about all that God has done for humanity. So I want you in the comments to let me know the connection between all 4 of those main ideas. This is what we do. We think through. I go, hey, I noticed this is a lot about humanity and what God does for us. I noticed in chapter 1 there's a lot of Jesus is better and lots of mentions of angels. I noticed in the beginning of chapter 2 is this call to not neglect a great salvation. So I just want to connect those ideas sequentially because the author of Hebrews is building a picture and building to a main point. And along the way, he's addressing these side tangents that play into the main point. All right, so I want you guys to let me know in the comments, what is the connection between those main 4 points? Again, Jesus is better than angels, number 1. Number 2, don't neglect a great salvation. Number 3, God subjected the world to come, not to angels. And number 4, these 3 verses tell us God treats humanity with such care and mindfulness. All right? And think about how those ideas might come together. If you didn't already know, we have a completely free Bible study program. I forget if I mentioned it, but in case I didn't, check that out in the description below or online at abovereproachministry.com. And I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walkthrough. Thanks for watching.